Hey, I am talking now about the unavoidable fall of the rotten from inside USA empire. And that is a very challenging subject because nobody wants to hear about that. It's a continuation of a 2008 booklet entitled Who Doomed US? And the answer was We the People. But it's not only that. In fact, for who knows better US, it knows that US is just the opposite of what it is praised to be. And the revelations about Trump, Biden, and COVID reign are unbeatable arguments to believe that American empire, with its corruption from inside, with its Cold War mentality and bellicose attitude, is prone to failure and disintegration, similar to what happens to the Roman Empire in the western part of Europe under year 470. As a personal confession, I can say when I joined the USA, it looks to me as a Star Trek uh, with reliable crew, right moral values, respect for truth, reality, and science, with a good respected constitution. After that, after I joined, I realized that was just for a facade. The real commanders on board and the crew was made of Ferengi, a corrupted population for where everything is for sale and with a deep disrespect for truth and reality, where the American language has a complex translation in plain English and it's based on the culture of lying and deception. Simply said, I didn't sign up for this. I was simply lied, misled, and deceived. I am a nuclear engineer, physicist, not a sociologist, so to do in-depth sociological analysis and write many-page novel. And I joined the US for the opportunity of doing advanced physics, so I was told, which did not which I did not because without lying and being an insider in Washington Circle, one may never get funded by the US government. Here is a mother of corruption, and we call it business as usual. The recent response to COVID gave me a kind of PTSD because I was appalled by Republican, Democratic, and people incompetence and hypocrisy, hate and criminal attitudes, racism and bigotism that was promoted by society in a tacit and systemic manner. I never conceived the US milestone as possible, and I mentioned 1 million people, national dead, from COVID mistreatment. About 10 to 20 millions being long hauler of COVID, about 100 million being infected by COVID, and everybody had a hard time in hospitals and being followed by big bills because healthcare in the United States is business, is no healthcare, so is learning and education. And now, just not finishing with COVID and the stupidity in attitude towards COVID, came a new one. Ukraine, a new victim of imperialism, of the empire of lies, and the Western militaristic aggressiveness. And I try to find the answer to all this. Why is that it happens? what are the real roots for this malbehavior and for this negativistic evolution. Hey, I was not planning for that. And my plan was just analyze what happens if yes, and why was that bad behavior for COVID, and what makes US to be such a such a divergence between the words and reality. But Ukraine is the last USA victim, and the criminal is this guy who provoked the war in reality because he has no reasonable position and was a war manager and was rusophobic because he receives money from the military industrial complex as any American European politicians. So business is before the conscience and words and moral values. But this guy is also not a good guy. Unfortunately, I hate to say that he is right now, and he was left with no choice but invading the Nazified Ukraine, which nowadays is a modern US colony. And in fact, Putin aimed to prevent a future nuclear war. And I explained that, but if you pay a little attention and Russia demands, and you have a little common sense about what a nuclear war means and how can it be started, you'll understand my statement. Russia's demand was to stop and backtrack NATO's expansion since and come back to the promises and agreements of 1989 when the Warsaw Pact was dismantled. But now NATO is broke, and the guys who were looking for something to get paid, and they don't want that. If they provoke a war, they are in business. No Ukraine, NATO, or European Union. Here is a distinction. If European Union is a kind of modern empire, but it's also an open market, and if is a little progressive, can be an open market, integrated various countries, and have an appropriate monetary policy in order to satisfy. But NATO is an aggressive organization that is way over borders of North Atlantic Treaty, and Putin is right, was advancing in doorstep of Russia, putting nasty stuff on the borders. Denazify Ukraine, and that was nazified under American watch, and that is a big hypocrisy. Respect means agreement that were all the time ignored, and mutual safety and security guarantees nuclear to stop placing. As you remember, the previous president, another a mascot and a puppet, was withdrawn United States for all the treaties, Paris, STAR, nuclear, open sky, etc., and leave the work for the way for mistrust and were very open, and by placing aggressive lethal weapons on Russia's border is an act of aggression, and that all these claims was been rejected by USA and NATO, and there was no other way, just destroy Ukraine, and that was good for United States because they don't know what friendship means. It's nothing personal, it's just business. And making Russians fighting with Ukrainians are two Slavic populations killing each other, and that is what Anglo-Saxons are skilled for centuries to produce in their colonial empire. A new arm race, a military-industrial complex will profit, and they invest about a trillion per year in the complex and that reserve war, and only by bloodshed they will make a profit. NATO by 2018 was near the bankruptcy and was needing something, and that was in 2014. United States organized a coup d'etat in Ukraine, and it was called the famous Maidan policy, and Victoria Nuland, that time Secretary of State, was directly implied with the US Embassy in all the state. Now, ironically, they complain about Russian interference in the elections when they interfere in the elections, all over the world. Well, recently, NATO, when they get in quarrel with Turkey, moves a dozen nuclear bombs from Irkilik in Turkey to Cogălnicianu Air Base in Romania near Constanța, and that bombs are about a half hour away from Russia, and that is a real danger for starting a nuclear war just by stupidity. Hey, good morning, fellow Americans. It happens that most of you happened to wake up dead this morning because 30 minutes ago we decided to terminate Russia, and since then we took about 10,000 nuclear blasts and have been delivered to Earth. So those still alive, pray for your death and buy and bring your coffins inside your home, sleep in them to get used and prevent any claustrophobia, as nuclear winter will come soon, and you won, you prevail, but you'll be dead. So that will be an announcement by United States, and we see they don't care, as they didn't care about 1 million fellow Americans. They have been murdered by using COVID. And this guy is also involved in 500,000 deaths as his predecessor. Well, Western envoys and allies work out on Lavrov's speech at the UN Rights Forum. UN is much a kabuki circus. Americans has a lot of vassal countries based on stupidity, that they don't understand that America cannot solve its poverty problems, and they still hope that Americans will give them a crap. This is an excellence in hypocrisy, the talk of Guterres, that says the dialogue remain open. What's the dialogue? As this guy said, dialogue between a duff and dump, as it was with British foreign ministress. Well, Geneva 100 is a country lie. Of course, they also press the truth, they promote fake media, and that was a big disease in Western country during Trump, because population do not trust any official media because it's owned by a few rich guys and have a communion of interest, and they make their lies and subduct the real media, promoting approved fake news, and become victimized by another extreme of a gang of crooks as we seen in the USA. Well, the guys didn't want to hear what the words, so the sound of war and the weapons is the only thing they'll really understand. And believe me, nuclear blast are pretty loud, and they may break the drums. Yeah. Hearing this is mankind fully deserve of being the most horrible species of animals earth ever created. And this might be a part of the future if you don't pay attention to each other needs for security, for safety, for business, and behave unilateral, arrogant in your stupidity. Well, if you apply critical thinking or simply follow the money, we have to be thankful to yourself for another war. Who benefited from that? Yes, try to benefit by preventing Russia to do business with EU and other lackey states, selling liquefied natural gas to European Union at a business worth about 100 billion per year, and also arms to EU and Ukraine with another billion. And these are the real leaders of the United States, are not the two kabuki circus parties called GOT, now Gang of Trump, and Party of Demagoguery or Democracies. And who has provoked the war? USA, Biden, and Stoltenberg, because that is a thief, he stolen a berg. And democracy was implemented by Azov, neo-Nazi, and other puppets of the president puppet, actor, a crook, and that bring neo-Nazis. And Lian Zhao is right. You should ask yourself, who is the one started all this? And that is what is really doing, is damaging, but the business is nothing personally, because the flow of money is going, and the guys in power are doing what these crooks are telling them to do. And that is a tragedy of the United States. And you see, these are not very educated, but very greedy and abject. If you look at Ukraine, you'll see that it's an ethno-linguistic map. Ukraine is not really a state, it's a conglomerate of basically two states. Polish blood and speaking a kind of Polish called Ukrainian. Polish is also a Slavic language. It was just another Asian tribe migrated into Europe in 10th century, and Russian that are spread in the south thanks to Stalin and other guys who also make humanitarian calamity, moving all the Tatars in Siberia and populating Crimea with Russians. So now Crimea is a Russian province, is no doubt in that. And if you split that in two, maybe three, it will be peace and may have a good cooperation. And well, using Ukraine is a West fault, as John Mearsheimer told many years ago in 2015, and showed that the Monroe Doctrine is versus power balance and politics. And Europe has a big trouble. Russia is a big exporter of minerals, materials, energy. And in actual inflation, because the productivity is very low and they have a high level of consumption, driven to inflation that await balance the real value of production to the value of consumption. So they'll be in big trouble, and they will have a big problem with that. And in Ukraine, you'll see, like in United States, it's a big division between pro-Russian, pro-Eastern countries, and pro-Western countries. It's a little Western dominance due to this higher population here and due to ethnic cleansing they applied in the eastern part. So they reduce the Russian population basically. US interference in all the countries is well known, everybody knows. The problem is the humanity is so stupid that agrees that and agrees that these arrogant puppets, the dictators, sanction the start wars, and was no year without a war that was provoked by United States. And in Ukraine, as they were involved since 91, seeding and growing the rusophobia sentiment, and that was in detrimental of the population in the East, and now the population in the West feel a little taste of war, and they will feel what their neighbors, their brothers in the East felt. And look who wants a war. Look how close they put their countries to the US military bases. That an American in Kentucky will ask himself, not understanding who was first and who was the second, but is based of moral doctrine. United States tried to surround and contain Russia, China, by organizing state coup d'etat recently in Kazakhstan, trying to penetrate in a strategic position. And also they put biological military laboratories developing viruses and disease as COVID was escaped from, possible from came Detrick, and first appeared as a valley spread up to Italy and then embedded in China during the Olympiad, and put the blame on Chinese for that, but the truth will appear in the future. Well, Biden to attend to a NATO summit from Situation Room as Putin invades Ukraine and doubles down in bullying Russia and infringing all the freedom of speech, all the freedoms and property rights, just to get a revenge on something and look tough and get some gains in election. And all the population, China, India, about more than a half of planet population disapproves these arrogant policies. A Chinese embassy in Russia published the list of armed conflict, which 81% were launched by the United States. So 4 in 5 wars was United States initiated. In the other 20%, 19%, United States interfered and provoked the war and become a proxy war. And that put the war in flames all the time due to the need of military industrial complex and Wall Street to make more money on the bloodshed. Look, for example, in the football with the world as a planet as a ball, what Biden's success was against the Earth is a 5-0. 1-0 was because Slavic population, Ukrainians and Russians were reduced, by a fratricide war by more than 50,000. And that's good. The less Russians, easier will be to conquer and steal their minerals and energy. Ukraine economy is grounded, so now competition for the future European integration, just a market. European Union economy is ravaged by submitted to US liquefied natural gas and weapon sales. Russian economy become bound to China and Asia, and Western world banking space will be separated from the rest of the world by alternative currencies and cryptocurrencies. Well, finally, these guys will be impeached and removed, and probably this guy will become again the president, and that will be near the end of United States as we know, because internal problems that he put in limelight are much bigger than the external. So United States is rotten from inside, and he is a catalyst for the hate and mistrust and maybe another war of secession in the United States. And of course, United States and NATO won't accept Russia's security demand. So what they expect Russia to do next? The only chess move, because Putin was pinned in the position, was a lovely nuclear war. And these guys said a lovely Second World War. And it's recommended to terminate the horrible humans. By this destruction of Nazism in Ukraine, Putin attempted to prevent that war. But it seems to be at no avail. And I hate to say I voted for Trump because Hillary was a crooked lady, she was right, and her place was in jail. But I stand out after he murdered 500,000 from United States citizens just for his stupidity and arrogance. And he is right. The real problem is that our leaders are dumb, and he is one of them, but he finds the truth. And so are the other guys, and if you look at them, you will realize what a low-quality people they are. Well, in fact, Biden and NATO provoked the war by interference in Ukraine in the doorstep of Russia. NATO and the European Union integrated Ukraine led by actual Nazi and was okay with the Nazis as long as they work for them. And they have also their racist concept, and that becomes obvious in Poland and Hungary and Ukraine. How they treat the foreigners versus how they treat each other, and how they treat the Syrians and Iranians when these guys destroyed their habitat. Ukraine wants a war with Russia for Crimea. If NATO and the European Union integrated Ukraine and Ukraine went to war with Russia for Crimea using Chapter 5 of NATO Statute, then Russia, with 100 million population, had to fight a military bloc of 1 billion population, and might be cornered and forced to use its nuclear deterrence for survival. In 1 week, 10,000 nuclear blasts might have been applied in the northern hemisphere, and in about 1 month, a nuclear winter will have been installed, and that will be solving all the global warming, and in 1 year, planet will be clear from humans. By 2050, Earth will be a clean planet, and will be as nice as Chernobyl forbidden area in recovery, and it took only 7 steps to destroy the civilization. As you know, similar to the seventh day, days mentioned by the Bible in creation of this monstrosity called human civilization. Well, United General Assembly has voted to rebuke Russia invasion of Ukraine. What a bunch of idiots and hypocrites. What a kabuki circus with idiotic representative, 141 lackeys. Did these US puppets carry about US atrocities in Asia, from Afghanistan to Libya? What is their moral values? What they are standing for? Just words and kissing American fat ass. The few states opposed, as Belarus, Syria, North Korea, Eritrea, and Russia, this is the axis of evil, and this is the good devils. And another 35, like India, South Africa, China, Iraq, Iran, find no worse in getting involved in this crap, so they abstained. This is the only language about the civilized West understands, because as one reporter said, in a place like Iraq or Afghanistan or Donbass, it's okay to have war, to have war crimes and a lot of murders, but this is a blonde population with blue eyes and relatively civilized, as looks like Aryans in the Nazi time in a Hitler doctrine, and now Polish believes that they are Aryan too, in spite of their rejection by the original brand of Nazism. And now the Ukrainians are also a kind of superior race. So Europe hypocrisy was seen in full show. Well, now I stop here. It's no pleasure for me. I'm very sad because I have Ukrainian friends, I have Russian friends, and seeing this fratricide war and seeing how United States and Western countries duped Ukraine and push it into war, I cannot matter by hypocrisy. Now, the hypocrisy is about the US Constitution, a very obsolete document, 200 years old, and if you read it with a normal English dictionary, it sounds so good. It's great material. But in reality, the words had no the same meaning. So when they say it's about a lot of hypocrisy, because when the men are born equal, they're not talking about that Negroes that are slaves or the Chinese or other races or immigrants. A man is a guy who inherited a fortune and it's a landlord or a slave owner. That is about. For this the Constitution was made, and was made of greediness in order not to pay the King of England the minimum taxes. So this is the history of incipient history of United States, based on robbery, murdering the local populations, the native so-called Indian, and the decimation is not the right term, massacring the Indians and killing 90% of them near the brink of extinction, and the rest pushed into reservation. This is the real history. So a lot of religious groups and bandits come and form the basis of US with a very nice written booklet that doesn't apply in reality and was infringed so many times. Since the beginning of US, The theft was a basic mechanism of US economy and US development. They started with atrocities against indigenous population called Indians, and then they start importing slaves from being kidnapped from Africa by various thieves called pirates working for the Kingdom of England. And then Portuguese, Spanish, all kind of European jackasses go into business because it was a very profitable money bringing business and atrocity to Africans and populations. So the slaveryism in US morphed but never ended. Since 400 years ago, slaveryism and racism is life and dwelling in the United States. But the United States needs slaves, not intelligent people. They're afraid of clever people. In August 20, 1919, we mark 400 years since the first slave ship arrived in Jamestown, Virginia. And I have to remark that the Anglo world was killed in pirating seas and colonies for 500 years, so they have a large experience in generating fratricide wars. By 1860, Clotilda was the last contraband ship that brings last slaves in the United States and was sunk in Alabama. And well, you see, they travel like nowadays on American or Delta flights, very crowded spaces with no leg room. Well, by 1860, the North was industrialized and needed slaves, and the South was under development but agricultural, and they have slaves. So the North guys started to steal the slave from the South because they invented the capitalism and freedoms, and that was a way to cut down the slaves' housing maintenance expenses, putting the slaves to take care of themselves for very derisory salary for almost nothing in paying back for their work and work many hours for very little money. In the modern time, Hollywood, the US deception machine, makes the slaves pay for their journey too. That is another big discovery. And see last year, 2020, immigrant crisis at US borders because this, as a immigrants becomes illegal intentionally and they take all the lousy works American are not doing, and they have because this was a crisis of at the borders to Trump's wars. They have issues with truck drivers, with all the low-paid jobs that were not fulfilled, and they have white-collar slaves that are coming with Delta, and after Trump's nationalistic propaganda, this kind of slaves stopped from coming, realizing that US is a no future country. Well, in the past, US was renowned as a BF country of all possibilities, but nobody told the main conditions. You need to be dishonest in order to enjoy these United States opportunities. The honest people that work and not stealing, they get no profit in the United States. Nobody get rich from honest work. Well, find something, a semblance. These guys trumped America, organized a coup d'etat called the Republican insurrection, because now in the United States a party wants to promote its power and doesn't matter what is doing, is far right, is racism, is bigotry. They want to stay in power. And the all great party was made by some clever guys with good standing and principles that are called now rhinos, and warps that now want just to be in power and form the GOT, or Gang of Trump. Now, hail Trump, hail Hitler. This is the future of America if these guys come again in power and was using the transformation of a so-called hypocritical democracy into a dictatorship, and with a lot of hypocrisy also. Hypocrisy is in the American blood, it cannot be removed. Well, in 2022 was no travel restriction, and this time Americans organized a coup d'etat in Kazakhstan. But by that time, Russia, China knew the lesson from Ukraine and shut down the spies and instigators, and everything calmed down, and CIA, Center for Intelligence, or maybe more exactly Dumigence, lost a lot of money in this operation, because that was a good strategical point from United States to put nuclear missiles against Russia and China just near their borders, and with about 5 minutes to the target. Well, so now the new card was, let's play the Ukraine and destroy that country in order to get a little prosperity, but it is more than that. They didn't thought well. Finally, I was not planned to talk about Ukraine, but it happened. I am sorry for Ukraine. I have very lovely friends, both in Ukraine and Russia. And I'm sorry for both too, because now Ukraine is a country in ruins, is a victim of Western hypocrisy and corruption of local politicians. This guy is most culpable for the war in Ukraine and provoked it by ignoring the legitimate Russian demands. And the European Union deception and hypocrisy played an important role. While delivering more weapons to Ukraine makes the war take place in all the country, all the town, because when a tank is attacked from an upper level in this building, it will fire back and will destroy the building. And that happens all over the Ukraine. All the buildings are damaged, and Ukrainians will have something to do for the next 30 years and will forget about nationalism, Nazism, and other crazy idea was in their head as ethnic cleansing and waging rusophobia. Now, the future of Ukraine and the most stable configuration will be a list of 2 free independent countries like Ukraine, the guys who are speaking a kind of Polish and pretend to be from the Rhine Valley, in Hitler terms, Aryans and superior race. But now we'll see how good they are running away from the war zone and destroying all the country block by block. Mixed Russian and Ukraine-speaking buffer region towards the Black Sea, and Russian-speaking intensive regions like Luhansk, Donetsk, Crimea, and Tiraspol. And of course, this piece of land stolen from Moldova by the Soviet Union and never returned that has a mixed population talking Romanian and Russian. Another last media deception is this misinterpretation of signalization rockets of the Ukrainian saboteurs as a fire into a reactor building, meant to use in political propaganda and have an orchestrated media deception. In spite, this is not the first reactor attacked. Israel attacked 2 reactors a few years ago. In 1981, it attacked Iranian reactor, nuclear reactor, and it was the attack that triggered the Chernobyl accident, because Russians tried to test if a bombarded reactor uses inertia to power the cooling circuit and not need any battery block, and they did in a horrible test, and that went wrong. The Chernobyl reactor running at 37 gigawatt instead of maximum 3 as was designed, and it was a mini nuclear blast followed by a fuel burn up. So this is a shame for the Western media that this ball of light is interpreted as a reactor fire, and everybody jumped to condemn Russia. Basically, all the nuclear plants have to be shut down and to be safe and secure during this war, and it's a Ukrainian business to power their country. When United States and the European Union gives them so many weapons to the population has no military base to fight from, so they'll fight from the blocks, and the country will be in ruins. And this guy playing another role now in a real position. It's a puppet of Biden. He, instead of taking the right decision, talking with Putin, taking out of Constitution the NATO expansion and the European Union, he said that we'll fight up to the end, and the end looks like this, like what Americans did in Syria, Iraq, Iran, Libya, Afghanistan, name one. There are 80 countries these guys promote atrocities, so in cooperation with these European hypocrites. In fact, they cannot meet Ukraine in a European space without an army and without having enrolled in NATO, because with a good security treaty, there is no real danger in Europe. Russia does not invade countries if it's not feeling threatened, and if they have good agreements and good business, there will be a cooperation, even including Russia and European Union. But these minds infected with rusophobia, racism, Minecraft doctrines that are in essence in Europe because they feel threatened by the brain development of the other races like blacks, Asian, Indians, makes that horrible things happened. The reasonable answer from this guy was to negotiate directly with Putin and ignore this American clown, and establish a cooperation and stay away from NATO as an aggressive bloc, because in fact putting the nuclear missiles on the borders of Russia and be 5 minutes to Moscow to be hit, it will make Ukraine a nuclear target for nuclear weaponry, launched from Russia. So it was just an explosion. There was no gain from joining NATO in these conditions. And now they'll see they make war and a miserable life for the Russians in eastern part of the country, making ethnic cleansing. Now they get a taste of war means, and I'm so sorry that this happens. Basically, I do not find better words to tell the truth and try to make all the parts understand the mistakes. Sanctions currently imposed to Russia shows the hypocrisy at its apogee. NATO tries to install US missiles inside Ukraine to be 5-minute target, and that will make the riposte decided by computers, where any error may trigger nuclear war. Until you wake up, you already see that the missiles already left and hit the targets in the other part, and the riposte is coming. So US have been caught several times, and the Russians only supposed to. US is number one terrorist, drone assassination, special murder forces in 150 countries. See rights of Negroes, natives, indigenous population, Asians in the US. See how the foreigners are treated even if they are white. It's a multi-layered tribal society. Was the US set up? Never proven. Breeds false flag to fabricate reason for intervention. Who invited US in Syria to guard the oil? In US is business as usual. Corruption, intervention in other countries, cyber attack, terrorism. Everything is permitted for US, and here is as in January 2022 how the implications is done in order to make Ukraine a failed country. US in relative decline compared to China, which is an increase, and US realize that, doesn't understand the roots of this decline, and start to do unfair practices to nick up China's development, looking for trouble in South China Sea, promoting Taiwan hate, anti-Chinese hate and dissidents, in Uyghur in the Chinese western sites near Tibet and in other countries. But in few years, China will become the first economy of the world, and in raw market value it will worth 4 times more than the USA. And US have to get used that with its brain power cannot be better than China because of the population factor, and need to adapt and become a smart power. If you look at the world population by country and you understand the IQ and you can calculate the brain power of any country, you'll realize that soon China will be maybe the second place. India is the first place, but still is starting for a very low IQ and will take time until it takes the leadership from China. But this is a brain power in giga IQ per population. And basically US will become in the 5th, 6th position with brain power if every other country will develop. Well, looking to the prognosis for evolution of population, we see that China today is the most populous country, but it might go into the second place after India, where the birth rate higher than China, and India is prone to take over China. Nigeria is one of the countries with fabulous birth rate, but it has a low IQ, while US will fall into the first position, and we need to consider European Union that is double of the population of US and might be somewhere between US or Nigeria. As the rest the countries evolve like this. Pakistan will stay in its place, will appear Indonesia and some other African countries will be getting increasing population, replacing the actual structure. In the idea that the brain power will increase, that the total brain power of the populations will dictate also the value of the economies. Well, using all means to prevent losing the leadership position, United States is using Taiwan as Achilles tendon and tries to strike China in South China Sea, where made it have hegemonial claims and make the American militaries out of that sea. And in the name of democracy, they push trouble in Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, or genocide. And that will mean trouble for China and eventually the creation of the fratricide war that will weaken both sides without weakening United States that will dominate the area. In the terms of military presence, there is a strong military presence in the area, and that makes most of the countries nervous and wants to increase the militaries of their own, going into militaristic approaches. Well, how so 5G was banned in the United States, and that resulted in a drawback and unfair practices were introduced in order to get technological advantages by using the lackey Canada that involved and learn about reciprocity in international relations with respect to outlaw enforcement, and dismissing Chinese common sense. This lady is a Chinese, and by her citizenship, she doesn't obey any USA laws and is not obliged to answer to USA for what he is doing in the business. It's just a shameful niqab and an economic blackmail. The United States leaders afford to do. And other guys make Australia, United Kingdom, United States stab the French in the back and promoted proliferation of nuclear technology in nuclear power submarine in South China Sea and South Atlantic. But the persecution of the Chinese stimulated the Chinese rocket program development. Well, as a lesson learned, US was terrible with COVID. With only 4% of population, it delivered 24% of the cases and casualties basically putting America first, and we lost 1 million people in this, and we had 6 waves of COVID and no lesson learned. Republican incompetence was replaced by Democrat incompetence. And everything, all these leaders were put in places in scientific responsibility based on political contributions. Well, to have a comparative idea, I represent USA, China, and ideal controls for a pandemic, and we consider that the setting of a control will determine the reactivity of a virus inside a pandemic. This is a reactivity scale, and this is a unity circle. So when you set the control about 40%, the virus will stay critical. That means the number of contagious people will remain constant in time. When contagiousness rate is greater than 1, then it explodes and creates pandemic, or when it's less than 1, it terminates a pandemic. And these are various controls based on a 50 years old hierarchy of pandemic control that is not based on vaccination, is based on elimination with technologic capabilities, substitution, engineering control, administrative control, și personal protective equipment. So, breathing, aerosols, air currents, masks that work or not, H-vacuum system, and these are part of elimination in the propagation stage of the virioli. And you see China with blue sets them about right, having terminated the pandemic in about 2 months. United States invented fictitious controls among the real controls that were in bad positions. Very few got in the right attention and control value. So they introduced a health of economy, and that there is no health economy with sick people. Freedoms, to wear or not to wear a protective equipment was considered freedom infringement, and that have a catastrophic impact on the United States population. Vaccines and worse of death was a myth that didn't produce expected results. Therefore, the previous results were obvious, and it was what the United States really deserved. If you look for an explanation, you'll try to look and to understand what happened in the United States. You try to look for the country's GDP to see how is their level of intelligence based on GDP, how smart and how they procure money. And you see that the United States in a very good position together of Canada and Europe. But when you look at how they use inventions, advanced robotics, how they use research, and how they are looking to the future, you'll understand that Anglo-Saxon world is prone to military development, to means of destruction, while the ASEAN countries are preoccupied with electronics and development of robotics and other means, and soon China will take over United States hegemony, becoming the first economy in the world. Here, I try to explain what happened, so I put a map of infection rate in absolute numbers. And that 0.14 is about 14%. And I plotted the IQ, official IQ of each country in the world that participate. We find USA with a declared IQ about 98. And we also find a lot of countries in China, Asia, Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and all the European countries in the medium IQ area. So we drawn a histogram at 2.5 points of the IQ distribution of the countries. So we learn that they may be divided on four domains of IQ and go from there. If we recalculate the IQ, dividing by the rate of infection and multiplying by population density, we had normally to obtain a first bisectoral distribution. But in reality, we obtain very strange curves that simulate a first bisector distribution, but are non-linear in fact. And that is intrinsic feature in the COVID applications, and we improve the formula to this gray one, and the IQ of a country depends of infection rate and population density. Well, from this we plotted the Gaussian of IQ for China, centered at 104, and for United States, centered at 98, but with the correction for the IQ that goes to 68. And inside this IQ, there are distribution on tribalized political classes, a lenticular society, where you have the Trump followers or GOT, Gang of Trump, with low IQ and very frustrated people. The Republicans in name only, that are the Republicans that remain to their principles, and they defend their status principia and moral. Democrats are a little smarter and independent that are from. But what you observe that the number of Chinese with IQ over 120 is higher than the United States' entire population. And the leadership is in question because you cannot lead only by playing with the currency and the financial system. We need to have clever people. And in order to have an age of a few million people, a leading age, US need to move its IQ from where it is now at 68 to 135. And that is simply, US is in point of no return, because with all the investment and what administration is doing now, basically we move 6 points on 10 points on IQ level, and there is a long way to go. This here is also plotted India, that is around 84, in reality is 72, and this India is also in development and will soon take the control in IQ over United States. Well, now due to New York State data release, we learned that healthy people exposed to COVID-19, from them 1 in 15 from those vaccinated get infected and 15 unvaccinated are infected. From these infected people, 1 in 14 is hospitalized, and from this, 1 in 6 is dead. But that is putting in a scale and looking for protection factor. We learned that we have 11.2 decibel protection from exposure to symptoms. We have another 10% protection from symptoms to hospitalization, and the 10% from hospitalization to death. Finally, the total vaccine protection is 32 decibels from healthy to death. Well, what people didn't understand is that the engineering method based on closed space protection, whereas HVAC system is sterilizing the air and is killing the virioli in air by using ultraviolet and septic filters with antibacteriologic content, may give a minus 50 decibel, already higher, and that is to not get infected, not after get infected prevent you failing so bad. A collective protection where people use filters and put the exhaust down in order to be near the floor and far from their noses and respiratory system gives another 50 decibels. And additional system where you have your personal protection, you inhale up, filter, sterilize, inhale and then exhale down, gives another 45 decibels, while an additional system that takes the exhalation air out in the sterilizer unit and release in the environment gives another 45 decibel protection. But mixing together this solution, you may go as low as minus 200 decibels, where you are very, very safe. While with vaccination, if you fail this engineered protection, somehow, vaccination will provide you a little bit better than N95 mask plus social distancing. Well, you need to understand the mask efficiency. So a mask is a barrier and has a protection factor depending on the concentration in the input versus the concentration in the output. And this is a formula for doing that. If you use two masks, what you exhale through one mask cannot be filtered to another mask. So your protection will be only 10% if the first protection is 9%. And this has the calculation showing how a person-to-person exhalation is protected. And here is how the virioli are transmitted, how many start from departure, and how many gets in the lung at the second person. This is the distribution of particle magnitude for normal speech and breathing with a maximum of about 0.6 microns versus coughing with maximum at 20-50 microns. And these are important for filtration calculations in order to understand how much is propagated. Also, the mask have in fluid system and effluents, they have atomization effect, where larger particles atomized become smaller particles and are passing through mask. And the leakage in the mask is important at inhaling and exhaling. Basically, 30% leakage is cancelling all the mask protection, individual protection. Well, there are nations that understand that coherent mask wear and the good mask and protection and number of people Using that, they drive to terminate the pandemic, and that was achieved by China and New Zealand, while USA is lurking inside the high infection rate and multiplication, and was not explained that a mask you'll wear and use in the same way you use beam lights at a car, and when are in proximity, you switch from the high beam to the low beam. That means equivalent to the long range speed to the short range speed delivered via the mask. Well, in New Mexico, they start giving prizes and medals for exceptional results, and something like kindergarten prizes among themselves to show us that they are world class too. And the United States also gives a day three champion, and he has some medals, and he has a milestone they are brag about, ignoring the realities of science. These are the daily freedom cases, the exodus cases when Americans are dying for that, and they are giving this kind of prizes. It's an abominable behavior for a health star. But the milestone is coronavirus in New Mexico is 351 in 6 deaths in 180, and those who recovered 1 in 60 is a long hauler. It's outrageous, is lack of common sense, lack of moral values, and hypocrisy at its best. Well, looking to the results in education, we learn that people do not have the right IQ to understand that, but results in education, we learn that United States in position 25 near France, and China, Singapore, Macau, Hong Kong are among the first places. Estonia, Japan, and South Korea, so all the Western Pacific Rim countries are better in education than the United States. United States is spending a lot, about 58,000 per student, is doing less than China does with 40 to 43,000, and it's equivalent to what France is doing with 16,000. So about $1 invested in the education in the United States has the effective value of the buying power of 25 cents quarter. And here it's a kind of typo. They say we trust in God, or in God we trust, but it's not, it's a typo. They are talking about gold for sure, because I do not see any religious component in this financial activity. Well, from the invention point of view, United States is trailing China, and Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and Switzerland are the most countries prone to invention develop with good input and overall performance. Is power of the brain that is depending of many factors that cannot be accomplished if you don't have a clear evaluation of how my brain you might have in an area and how can you stimulate the brain to create inventions. In the USA, education is no more an education, it's just a business under the name of education, practicing students' extortion and promising connection after they pay a lot. And these promises never come to life except to the few well-connected students with well-connected parents that get better jobs. So they are kind of private universities that are exceptionally expensive and state university. Both are doing a very bad education based on memorizing and is no match for similar better university where the tuition costs are by 20 times cheaper and more affordable, while the students are learning relaxed with good knowledge and able to connect the dots in the future. Some of them come a specialization in the United States, paying a lot just to have this was a fashion because it was overpraised and was over the boundaries of deception. There are a lot of paid universities also in China that gradually they start to disappear because the people will not pay so much, and these are similar to NGOs waste infiltrate revolutions and social unrest into sovereign countries. Morale is here very important in education because without a good morale, there is no reason to get good results and learn with love and affection. And these are some of the US values ranking in the top 15. Belonging or patriotism is variable. It's high for soldier and simple people that are proud to be a citizen and do everything to serve the country well. And is different for businessmen and politicians that have a very fishy attitude about patriotism. Family is also a wide range error subject. Relationships are important because in United States we say it matters who you know, not what you know. And personal growth is affected by this, and health well-being is important but is very expensive because the efficiency of spending in healthcare is very limited. It also less than a dime per dollar. Basic needs is a flappy concept. Employment security. Religion and spirituality is very interesting because most of the people go to church, pretend that they are good believers, but their beliefs and what they talk about doesn't hold up to the door. And we have freedom of speech, but it's not a real freedom of speech. It's like barking at the moon because nobody hears you, and for many, loyalty is more important, and well, this is connected to family, but not in the sense of normal family, in the sense of Italian Cosa Nostra. And that helps you with welfare, personal growth, and gains in a kind of mafiotic society. Well, Ten Commandments. They were good for all the three religions coming from Middle East area, for Christian, Jewish, and Muslims, but very few know them, and even fewer are respecting them. And in the aberration from a few years ago, this guy was treated as a savior by the religion people, and they want him to be their king. And these are large masses brainwash sessions, and everybody was lying as much as they could, and they used to lie themselves and lie in the family, and that is a detrimental to education because here they are taught to believe and not question, and here they are taught to be proud of them and brag about them as much as possible, and ignore everything they don't know or don't. The mass media doesn't give the young generation good example to follow in science, medicine, education. This is an LGBT, these are artists in music and movie, basically living in alternate realities. And the education for girls is very inappropriate because for early age, girls know to be successful, they have to show their sex devices, to put them on display and to use them in order to get a promotion. And that is very wrong because they will not be future candidates for science or medicine if they think that are a little bit attractive and beautiful. They try to use this kind of advantages. Look, also, movie maker now realize that in movie and in media, the scientists are not presented, and how many youngsters will take him as a model? I bet you don't know who's this guy. Maybe a guy like a chameleon with a chameleon tongue, or these guys who lied about COVID and now pretend to give the ultimate advices. But also, the movies, the media is full of violence and sex. And even in Star Wars, the direct fight with swords, bats, and other stuff is promoted because otherwise public doesn't understand. They don't understand directed energy and remote killing. Well, if you look to a country and the revolution, you need to look to the leadership, and you look. These are the U.S. leadership by political affiliation, by they are professional before becoming politicians, and in fact they are two guys on a motorcycle going down the cliff. They are preoccupied fighting each other than steering the motorcycle. And that is due to the masses that have very low IQ and are not able to select the right people in the right position to, to represent them for good, not just for political purposes. And well, this is a democracy. But the beauty is that every other year the masses are going to voting booths to elect leaders they don't trust. And in the United States there are only two engineers, and compare that with China, with Russia, with other countries, and you'll see the difference in the quality of political decision and the progress. Well, the future doesn't look grim for United States based on the fact that COVID and Trump put in limelight the real face of Americans, and that is not so pretty. And because of fundamental difference in IQ of the population and advancement competition from more populous countries as China and India, and in about 30 years, the world will become multipolar, where China, India, and European Union will be the leaders, followed by United States, Brazil, and Russia. Or if United States has hard time ceding the leadership position and looks for trouble, the world will look like this, and global warming challenge will be solved by default, going inside into a nuclear winter and a big part of civilization disparition. Well, as you see here from this chart, these are catastrophic. We put America first, and this is a real MAGA. As some guys used to say, and are proud of this, but 1 in 7 Americans get infected, and with only 4% of the planet population, we contributed to more than 25% toward casualties. Imagine that from these 45 million infected people, about 6-7 millions are long haulers, and they suffer from symptoms for a very long time after the disease. We see other countries with tend to take our champion position, like India, but India has a population of 1.3 billion, and when reach this, they are already alerted, while at us is still business as usual. And Brazil, and then the other states have a more moderate achievement in COVID. Hello, America. It's now time to wake up from your political coma. Something wrong is in your voting system because it allows perversion and manipulation, and it doesn't really reflect the will of the people. But I put together 4 maps showing United States political map leaning, and also the COVID infection map that looks almost similar to political leaning, and the IQ map. And then is by state, the America is divided, and is very worrying, this map, because you'll see that ocean states have a different view from the continental states dominated by Republicans and being more conservative. And they are not conservative population because they have really something to conserve or preserve. They have any values. The conservative is driven by the incapability of learn, and they want to pass all the life with the little knowledge they learn in the kindergarten. And that is the scary truth behind the conservatism in the United States. Here is, in the COVID times, the immorality of American aid. That aid was flowed in the business owner, was stolen, and a lot of guys cheated and get advantage, while the poor Americans didn't get anything out of that, are frustrated, disappointed, even with Biden presidency, that follows the patterns of the previous presidency. That US no decency, and May to September it was not enough. And here is an example of what American can do after destroy a country. They deliberately organized chaos in withdrawal, not really because they cannot do it in an organized manner, but because they were cheaters and they didn't want really to take all the guys who by stupidity served their interest and betrayed their own country. And here are some data about how they cheat their own population using programs praised as PPP and stimulus check, but that are not correctly applied, and they did a lot of discrepancies. More, they ignore the illegal immigrants. They did a lot of job, and the business owner of stealing from their pockets but underpaying these guys, and they didn't get any support for COVID. And you know, if a bear is hungry, the bear takes himself, and that is a simple explanation for a high crime rate and gun usage into the right. And if you criticize this incompetent guy for Afghanistan, the Americans have no memory that the Afghanistan withdrawal was decided to be executed 6 months before by May and was done by these incompetent guys. So if you want to take the most incompetent American politicians and put in place, you need to take one randomly because incompetence, demagoguery is the main feature of these American politicians. Well, that is another paradox. Here is the last Democratic President Biden realized that something is wrong with American IQ education. They didn't invest for a long time in the United States population, and he honestly tried to correct that. But look what happens because the United States is so divided. One of the Democrats from the less educated state with the less brain power, he himself very poorly educated, being just with a business school and doing carpet business, and then discovering that barking in politics will bring him up, and had a stellar record of political position from governor to senator. This corrupt politician for a small dumb state dictates the future of United States. And that is a kind of Bolshevik revolution because the masses are creating the history, and a dumb masses are in average dumb, and history is dumb and reflects the creation. So if you put here the brain power of the states, you will realize that many of the states have very little brain power. The real IQ is about 67. And if you look who is leading these low IQ states, you will also realize that they are led by Republicans, and they are mainly conservative states. And as I tell before, they do not have too much to conserve or preserve because they don't have real values. All the values they promote, they are infringing on a regular basis. And the only preservation is ignorance. There are the states leaning a little democratic that have a high IQ, but is far away of what we really need in order to be a really competitive nation, and only well, as I told before, the grim picture given by IQ distributions was reflected into the January 6, 2021 Republicans GOT, that means Gang of Trump, coup d'etat. And that insurrection was caused by misinformation, and a bunch of crooks took advantage of the believers and their low level of education, unable to have a comparative data and find the truth by a crosstalk between different channels of information, so become addicted to QAnon and to the lies promoted by Trump acolytes and by the ex-president Trump. And well, it was another factors that drove to this outcome, because in this year, due to their travel restrictions, the Americans decided to organize a coup d'etat at home. But otherwise, they may do it somewhere like abroad, like Ukraine, Kazakhstan this year, and Syria, Iran, Iraq, and name a country, and Americans are happy to fly and organize some Maidan or Orange revolutions, however they'll call it, in the name of democracy, but followed by war, destruction, and poverty. Here is some very clever faces of the revolutionary, and they try to cancel this guy from the power, but they infringe all the constitutional tradition. Looking why this happened, it was, we found a grim reality. We looked over the years and the elections to the presidency by states, and also the distribution of Senate, Congress, and House. And what we learned was the instability of American mind, because most of the states switch from left to right, right to left, and imagine driving a motorcycle in this style. Or it resembles, for those who may understand, the FODO structure, focusing, defocusing, and transport structure. So the transport is in time, and focusing and defocusing periodically annihilates all the action and intention. Everything flows in the middle, and almost nothing happens. The parties are fighting each other, and they ignore the historical reality, failing to act on time in the advantage of the American people. Well, that doesn't happen when there's a military-industrial complex interest at stake, and then the Democrats and Republicans are the same, because both parties are bellicose, are based on misinformation, deception, and putting blame all the time on the other side. But look at this wonderful tapestry, and that is a recipe for doing nothing and remaining, conserving the very low IQ, and having being a nation unable to adapt and thrive in critical conditions. Well, looking to the single-party control of U.S. Congress and presidency, the party in control was very few times, and they manifested being achievements. And during Hoover time, we have big constructions, highway, Hoover Dam, stuff like that. A little bit on Eisenhower period, and Truman wartime, and America was mobilized and win the war, and change the future of the planet by developing the nuclear weapons. Now they are in danger to exaggerate the power of nuclear weapons and put all the planet in danger, and both Bush, Obama, Trump benefited for a very short period of totalitarian leadership, but they failed to pass main issues for American people, that investing more in education and is a new generation, and changing the American style of education that is business oriented and less reliable education oriented. During the Trump, the dissolution and discrepancies between the two political views was accentuated and amplified, finally starting with a difference in population of 20-30%, core Republican versus core Democrats, and it aggravated very bluntly into Trump period when there are basically two Americas, one of the conservative guys and one of the democratic guys, but they have very hard time to find a consensus and get a unified actions in the name of American people. So this is the blue is the democratic America and the red is the conservative one. And that is detrimental to American future and leadership in the United States. Well, democracy is a term used and abused here, and with the people is another one, because US is not really a democracy. It's more dictatorship under the camouflage of democracy. And the statement in God we trust includes a typo because it's about gold, not God. The people talking about God, what they talk in the church, doesn't stand up to the door, and they do completely opposite in reality from what they talk. The strong hand of militarist United States is seen, and some alternative reality, low education, and was fully proved in the Republican insurrection by 2021. Now everybody says that is a touristic move, and this is fair exercise of a political discourse. Well, translating from American language in plain English, it's difficult because what an American user sounds that resembles the English dictionary are made of the concept of deception. And all these moral values in these three that doesn't grow in the United States have to be taken with a sense of humor and some decency and awareness, because American moral values are not what they brag about. Character is mainly dominated by hypocrisy, generosity, it's about greediness, truthfulness is mainly a deception, knowledge is very superficial and based on memory, and doesn't help a person to connect the dots. Love is about when it's about hate or interest. And American friendship is nothing personally, just business. And is very fragile. Friendship, basically, you cannot have American friends because they will not understand the concept of friendship with the personal and moral values. And it's Judaic culture, and Judaic means not in the Jewish term, but in the sense of Judas, the guy that betrayed Jesus, a kind of cousin of Jesus after all the discoveries. So this Judas-like friendship is what is main characteristic. and that was seen in external policies and many agreements, conventions, treaties that are breached regularly by the USA based on interest and changing of the political party in power. And that's a cover. We need a translation from American language to plain English to get it. And in order to get it right, we need education based on moral value to be practiced in the United States. As I told you at the very beginning, when I came in the United States, I was lured by these moral values and the moral values of the crew of the Starship Enterprise. But when I reach the deck in the United States, I find only Ferengi, the types like these guys that practice deceptions and nothing is credible in what they are doing and saying. To find the truth in their webpage, you need to divide the reality by 10, and that will be about the realities they are bragging about. Well, USA pro-life is another hypocrisy, and this is very well shown by the Milwaukee Independent. What Matthews 26 is really transformed based on the real doctrine. Yes, they love the unborn life, but they show a deep disrespect for any life after birth. And they want to save money because they want to line the pockets, and they pretend they are pro-life, but in fact it's a demagoguery, it's a revenge to the women that had real sex and nothing for, they don't give a crap on the born life. As they consider mothers are most murders, and they like having children. And the smart ones do not multiply like rats, as the Pope Francis says one time. They have discernment and they are looking in the interest of child future, and they don't make child if the future is murky or is iffy future. They want to be poor, stupid, and work for almost nothing in corporate America. So that is the real cause of poorness and lack of real interest in the life and the welfare of the own population is a trigger for decreasing the birth rate. Well, some GOT, Young of Trump Republicans, because they have now verticality and they do everything in their power just to stay in power. They hope that if the birth rate did not grow, they may deploy the National Guard or another branch of the military in order to increase the birth rate. Well, if you connect the dots, you understand the joke. And the US is not a national builder of US President affirms so all the actions in the Middle East were basically a nation destroyer. They promoted destruction under military and interventionism, and the nation remained devastated after they trusted them and operating. And the militaristic component of the United States is seen in this distribution of military base and research laboratories that are over 160 all around the globe, trying to encircle the main world power like Russia, China, and India, and also Brazil and Chile, Argentina. In this country, near vicinity, they organized many interventions and coup d'etat, changing the regime after their preferences. And These are the places they initiated war all over the world under the freedom umbrella, imposing their corrupted democracy to the other nations, and that will make them weaker. And this is a real danger because obtaining the disapproval and hate of so many nations, it will be difficult to have a path for progress, prosperity, and being a smart leader, driving by the power of example, not of the example of the power exercise. Well, face recognition, spying on a US citizen is not allowed by the Constitution, but Constitution is a very nice document written by some drunk people with a lot of hypocrisy embedded, and nobody respects it, and everybody tries to go around with committed atrocities and crimes against nature and against population being in disagreement with the Geneva Conventions they already promoted. No matter the regime, the stand for truth is the same. Truth is anti-American, and no matter the crimes and atrocities, what matters is why somebody discloses it, and they consider enemies, the media and all the persons that afford to disclose and talk about the truth. And yes, use censorship and surveillance work, but it lies about it in the name of democracy. In synthesis, some Russians say that this is empire of lies. They are not very far from the truth, because even in science, the only way to get funded in the USA is like Terranos example, use sex and lies and deception in order to get promoted and get paid for anything, and keep everything secret while doing bad science and lying and concealing all your actions. This is an example of what United States researcher is in real life, is like this lady. Well, multi-perverse, multi-standard US justice. So, for example, they have many layers of justice, many standards in the name of freedom, and this one justice for Negroes, taking a few grams of drugs to inhale them and stay happy a day or two without food and forgetting about their life mishaps. Is an example of this lady that was a master of deception, but not having political figures stand behind her. The justice tried to be mildly applied for her, being blonde and with blue eyes, is not the prison time and a real punishment like for these guys is not what they do. So it is a lot of racism in the justice. And the most representative for the justice is not this lady with a sword with the breast outside like a cow with some weighting scale, but this guy. And the family and friends are protected as is under Trump presidency, where 500,000 men were slaughtered by using the weapon at all called COVID. And there is an inexplicable deception. So now we have a law for the right, a law for the left, and you see how much politics the Supreme Court is doing, and is applied against poor citizens, but not against the rich people that escape with minimum sentences for whatever they do. As this guy said, if he shoots someone, he will be just fine. And that was seen against Negroes, Asians, and other immigrants compared to the gringos and political and business crooks. The CIA and the culture of failure, or maybe they need to change the name. Central Intelligence Agency, maybe switch it in the Central Intelligence Agency. And that is the appearance of what they are doing. But if you take in account the cynicism of this organization and the hypocrisy of the leaders, you will see that they did exactly right, because the goal was to manipulate public opinion and destroy and demolish the nations they get involved and get to believe in their lies. And that is another action made in the detriment of a powerful United States that lead by its example to be a soft, smart power, the word to follow. Well, international assassination drone program was started by Obama, and it killed a lot of people. That in the same way JFK was shut down and was outrageous, the same murder this orange frog did to a general, Iranian General Soleimani, it's an international murder, it's a crime against humanity and Geneva Convention. No matter if he was a good guy or a bad guy, being in diplomatic mission, it's his assassination. It's an act of war, and it's a despicable fact. And there are only two nations in the world that are doing this despicable assassination in order to clear their path and line up the pockets with robbing other nations. Crimes against nature is what the United States did in Tabqa Euphrates Dam in Syria, where they want to kill as many Syrians as they could along the valley, ignoring that this kind of bombing was prohibited by the Geneva Convention. They supported and enforced. And the problem is that Americans are not allowed to have their opinion, and it's not a problem the United States criminal actions. The problem is when they got caught, because they want to punish the guys who disclose their murderous actions and crimes, and not to be punished for their deeds. And this was a terrorist in chief with a lot of terrorist action in Syria, and wonder why they were there, who invited them, who provoked the Syrian internal war and revolution. Biden says he has right in Syria killed ISIS leader. It's another assassination. Even it was not a US citizen, assassinations are assassination and have to be denounced and the promoters punished, but in the case of state-driven assassination, is nobody in the world of 110 states that abstain to listen to the Russian claims and their reasoning can do. They like it as it is, and they being a lackey of United States and give the total submission of their nations. But this is the welfare Americans brought to most of the planet while grabbing their wealth. Well, the most investment in United States is this in war technology, in equipment to kill civilization instead of develop the civilization. I'm for this technological development. I'm only against of using this military capability against humanity instead of using it for humanity. And we'll be confronted soon with a bigger enemy, is called the Earth, or acting under the climate change. And the humans were already identified and singled as the enemy of the planet, and the planet is on its path to remove the humans from its species. So we'll need the military. Well, World War III, as I showed in the beginning, because it was not the intention to talk about Ukraine and Russia and the war, but World War III is as near as never, and the countries are preparing and for this, and will be no winner, will be just a planetary destruction. And as soon as the missile will have to fly, there'll be hope of life and survival will be counted in terms of months, not of years, because as was well studied, nuclear winter will come for about 50 years, and no vegetation and will grow, and there'll be a lot of starvation, food shortages, and a lot of turmoil on the planet. US military industrial complex, a more than $1 trillion business per year, and has a very complex structure acting under Pentagon's umbrella and NATO, but financing private companies with a lot of the GDP and taxpayer money in order to do equipment to kill the humans. And Pentagon is driving to a much US economy that doesn't know anything well but war equipment to do but war equipment. And this has the wars United States started, and if this started by other parties, more than a half they were due to United States proxy intervention. The Pentagon is lying and continues to lie to make a deception. This guy, a good guy, a good general, ended up by being the master of deception in Iraq weapons of mass destruction. Iraq war, that was in fact a war for oil, and these are the liars that were promoted in high top Pentagon position. And the people learn in the United States that all the media told and promoted is fake, and that attracted the mistrust in the United States media. The recent Orange Frog started bully the NATO and G7 members, and it makes them be stressed and invest more in the war, and end up with this kind of equipment acting in the name of peace. And the media is very skilled in doing that, acting in agreement with the leaders. You know, is a massive failure, and the fact there is a point of no return. So United States is already crossed this point, and it will be difficult to remain the world leader power in the world. We need the United States to stop demonizing other countries, blaming for their own failures, and start in a an atmosphere of cooperation. That is fictitious, is just press stunts, and it serves to no good. Start electing leaders with high morale and integrity, not allowed tweeting birdies that nobody trusts them, preaching their falsehood as we did in this case, and stop terrorizing the world. Repurpose US Army for nation building and recovery from disaster will be the best idea, and install an atmosphere of trust, cooperation, and real democracy. To accept a peaceful transition to the leadership to other countries based on brain power and GDP, while promoting development, fair competition, and collaboration, I think is the hardest thing for US to acknowledge and do, because that means in the future China will be the first, India second, European Union third, and USA the fourth. And USA still believes that is the second, but in reality it is not. And in order to compensate and maintain its leadership and its power of example, it needs to act over the IQ distribution to move it from the 68 number it is really now to over 110 in order to be competitive with the Chinese. In spite for the total IQ of national brain power, it will count a quarter of what Chinese is in reality. And we need to reform the justice to apply the same for all in a constructive manner, to invest in effective education and national research and development, improve food water quality and clean environment, and reduce social inequity, eliminate discrimination of any kind. If these are achieved, United States will not become the leader, because it will never be. The brain power of this nation is in continuous growth, but will be an example to follow and a leader by its example. It will need to repurpose the military to aid the humans in the confrontation with the planet and the climate change. Well, I stop here. It's a lot of discussion. I'm not in the specialty to do it right. As I told you, I'm a nuclear engineer physicist, and I'm concerned more about nuclear aspects of the future world confrontations and the militaristic path United States took that will drive to planetary destruction and United States mistrust and failure in the United States. And that is not good. This is what I try to prevent, to tell the truth by name and exactly, and because only by this knowledge we can make the corrective actions to be efficient and operate in an effective manner, not being only a bunch of demagoguery. I thank you for your attention, and please use higher speed and stop where you need to get and understand the explanation or see many of the aspects we put in the page, but I don't have time to talk in detail about everything. It's a very complex, multi-dimensional, and multi-scale problems that need to be solved with the politicians we have, unfortunately, and convince them to do the right thing and stop fighting when the country is falling from the cliff. Thank you, and feel free to make comments or ask questions.